After months of having only one Republican presidential candidate, the 2024 primary field is slowly starting to take shape. NBC News is reporting that former UN ambassador and South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is set to launch her bid for the White House in 2 weeks, which would make her, at least for now, the sole challenger to Donald Trump, a position that apparently almost no one in the Republican Party wants to be in. The New York Times is reporting that despite being supposedly eager to challenge the former president, GOP contenders are still too afraid of him to be the first. The Times writing that these hopefuls have so far been unwilling to officially jump into the race, wary of becoming a sacrificial lamb on Mr. Trump's altar of devastating nicknames and eternal fury. And we're already seeing that with Haley. Just hours after the reporting came out regarding Haley's pending announcement, Trump posted on Truth Social an old clip of her saying that she wouldn't throw her hat in the ring if the former president ran in 2024, writing, "Nikki has to follow her heart, not her honor." Joining me now is David Plouffe, MSNBC political analyst and former campaign manager for President Obama, and Stuart Stevens, my buddy, senior advisor to the Lincoln Project and chief strategist for Mitt Romney's 2012 campaign. Gentlemen, so Stuart, the part of the headline from the Times I really want to talk about is this idea that Republicans are eager to challenge Trump. They're so excited, can't wait to jump in, because quite honestly, I don't think any of that's true. I know these guys. They aren't particularly eager to do this. Now, they may be, beating their breasts here and there, talking about the moment Trump, will engage with them and thinking that it's going to go one way. But the minute he does, it goes another way. How do you see it?
Listen, I think that if we're looking for courage in the Republican Party, Michael, we're going to have to hunt it with dogs for a long time. Listen, I think why is Nikki Haley running? I don't think she's really running because she thinks she's going to be president of the United States. She's running. First of all, she doesn't have anything else to do. She's raised some money here in a PAC, and she'll run. I would say she's running to be vice president. I don't think she's going to go out there and attack Donald Trump. But, no one else really embodies sort of the collapse of the party as well as Nikki Haley. This is someone who at one time, you remember, Michael, she had it all.
I helped to get her elected in 2010.
She was what the party was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And she went out and said that Donald Trump was everything that she taught her children not to be. And she went from that to saying that she wants to run to carry on the Trump legacy. It's just so sad. She's already broken. Trump has this history of breaking candidates. She's already broken before she gets in the race.
Yeah, that seems to be the narrative for a lot of these guys, David. When you even look at someone like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, the other day we saw all these headlines that said DeSantis snapped back or hit back at Trump after he went after DeSantis' COVID response. But did he really? I think he's just ducking and covering at this point. That wasn't a clapback from DeSantis. That was more like, okay, pat on the wrist.
Right, but it gets outsized coverage because so many people have cowered. He basically, destroyed the 2016 field and brought them to heel. So to me, that is, listen, everyone's got to run their own race. And if you're Ron DeSantis, maybe you don't want to turn it into a daily slugfest with Donald Trump. But you got to show voters, political observers, that you cannot just take a punch from him, but you can counterpunch and maybe throw some. What's remarkable about this, by the way, is, there's some exception to this, but history shows us, the timing of this matters. So if you want to be president, now's the time to run. Let's just look at Barack Obama. Let's say he had listened to most people in 2008 and 2007 and not run. 8 years from then, he would have been a creature of Washington, probably would have had no chance at the nomination or very little. So this is a big thing. If you think you should be president or could be president, you can't say I'll run in 2032. You've got to run now. And listen, if you can't deal with Donald Trump, you can't do the job. Trump was, again, I think, an aberration where he didn't really take the job seriously. But I think most people run for president intend to try and do something with that office. And so it's an interesting test. But I think the big question here is, how do people assess the size of the field? I think there's some sense that Trump wants a bigger field. But right now, you could argue that DeSantis is the person who would benefit from the bigger field if he's able to kind of hold on to his strength and looks like the more dominant figure in that primary. So, but yeah, I think people are still scared of him. And for me, if you can't deal with the Truth Social missive from Donald Trump, you have no reason to think that you could occupy the most powerful office in the world.
So, Dave, I want to follow up with you on what you were saying about the size of the field, because USA Today is reporting that some Republicans are actually concerned about having too many candidates in the primary field, saying if the party fails to consolidate around an alternative candidate, that they risk, winding up with Trump as the nominee again, very much like they did in 2016. In fact, New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu is quoted as saying, "I think there's a general understanding and appreciation that, look, if folks are getting in the race, fine, but if you're not doing well, you've got to get out." Stuart, what does that even mean? Who's going to tell them to get out?
Well,
you know how these egos are.
I think it's a false premise. The premise is that the Republican Party is looking for someone other than Donald Trump. And there's no reason to believe that at all. There's a certain establishment that finds Donald Trump to be distasteful and would rather vote for someone else who knows which fork to pick up and won't go out and talk about having sex with their daughter in public. But the general public in the Republican primary, they want Donald Trump. And I think we have to look at where, Donald Trump is going to be a much better candidate in this race than he was in the last. In the last, he was an incumbent who had to defend a record. I mean, Donald Trump defend a record? He didn't even know what his record was. Now he can go out and just attack everybody, which is how he was in 2015. And I think the guy is going to have a lot of fun at this. He enjoys it. He enjoys inflicting pain. And David, to me, has always been a good example because his candidate, Senator Obama, enjoyed that race more than anybody else. And that's usually not a bad indicator of who's going to win that race.
So just to begin to see the sort of effect that Trump has already, you have my buddy Maryland Governor Larry Hogan walking back some of the comments he made today on the Hugh Hewitt show, saying he would support whoever the Republican nominee is, even if it's Trump. Now, he's come back and clarified those remarks, tweeting, quote, "To be clear, my position on Trump hasn't changed. Trump won't commit to supporting the Republican nominee, and I won't commit to supporting him. As I repeatedly said, I fully expect to support the Republican nominee, who I don't believe will be Trump." So is it wishful thinking for not someone just like, Hogan, but for all these Republicans to think that they can sort of walk that fine line to the nomination without having to recognize at some point Trump may be the nominee, and then what do you do? Stuart?
Well, Michael, I think it's a difficult line to walk. I would say this, though. I don't think this is that complicated. I think most Republicans, now Larry Hogan's been a fierce critic of him, as you know. I think most Republicans can simply say, I'm running for president. Yes, I agree with a lot of things Donald Trump said. He can't win an election. We lost 18 badly, we lost 20, we lost 22. It's time for fresh blood, kind of the gold watch strategy. Now, he'll go apoplectic, obviously, and you'll get a lot of criticism for saying that. But I think they all have to find some way to distance. Now, if they're asked, I think almost all of them, maybe Hogan's the exception, would say, sure, I disagree with them, don't think I should be our nominee, but anybody's better than a Democrat is what they'll say. I don't think this is this complicated. They get really tied up in a knot. And I would say, I agree with what Stuart said. Right now, there's no evidence that, there's a huge groundswell amongst Republican primary voters for someone other than Trump. But if you look at some of the polls, some of the focus groups that have been done that I find interesting, there is an opening for somebody. He's not sitting there at 70 to 80% of the likely primary vote. Maybe he's at, depending on the poll, 35 to 45. That's an opening. Right now, DeSantis seems to be the next person on deck. We'll see if he can put it together. I mean, as Stuart knows, running for president is an obstacle course. Most people come out of it less whole than they go into it. So it's a really, really hard thing to transact. And I also do agree that last race did not suit Trump. He was, having to defend his record. He was obviously playing a little more tight. He didn't seem like he was enjoying that race. 16, he was a happy warrior, maybe an unguided missile, but a happy warrior. And I think we'll see him come back to that. But I do think there's an opening here. But if I were the question is, when does a DeSantis have to decide? He probably doesn't have to decide now, but probably by April. You got to get into this thing, I think, by Q2 to put together a formidable winning presidential campaign.
So, Stuart, just real quick before we go, you've got the Democrats who are going to be voting this weekend on whether to rearrange their primary election. What's your thought on that being pushed by the President of the United States? And how do you think that may impact what Republicans do in future primaries?
Yeah, it's a big deal. I think if they move it to South Carolina, it's a good idea. David and I have waded through the caucuses of Iowa. It's the weirdest experience. It's basically like a student body election. There's very few people that you need to win that thing. I think one of the big impacts here on the Democratic changing the calendar is going to be in New Hampshire. Because in New Hampshire, they have open primaries. And if there's not a Democratic candidate running at the same time that the Republican primary occurs, it's going to free up a lot of voters, independents and Democrats, who could vote in that Republican primary. And that's going to be difficult it's very interesting. You could say that they're going to go in and vote for someone other than Trump. You could say they're going to go in and vote for Trump because they think Trump will be the easiest one to defeat. We just don't know yet, but it's a real wild card that'll be opened up.
I love wild cards. Thank you to David Plouffe and Stuart Stevens. I appreciate you.